So we all know about the classification of musical instruments. You could put things in columns: brass, woodwind, strings, etc. Percussion, keyboards, plucked strings, you name it, it can all be done. So guitar and keyboards are the main two things that you will have that will play chords. And you can voice those chords accordingly on your instruments. Now, what about violin, for example? Chords are not traditionally played on a violin, but you can do things where you can play a chord that's sort of a swept chord with some melodic line afterwards. So there, the chords are just simply there to say, there's the harmony and now here's the lead line, and then you repeat that. So it's quite a flexible way of delivering that. You've also got the expressive control of things like vibrato and dynamics within the note. And you've also got the flexibility to be able to bend notes. So we're no longer constrained to the sort of equal temperament thing. Flute is a very similar thing to the violin in that you can change the dynamics of the note. You can also play with the embouchure, which can actually change the tuning of your note, which is either a good or bad thing. So, you can do a lot with all of these instruments, and of course they all do different jobs. Wouldn't it be great, however, if you could do all of this chord stuff, but with a continuous pitch, and also with that sort of expressive content? Well, you can with this. This is the pedal steel guitar. It's like a tabletop guitar. You've got 10 strings, the tuner's this end, and the pickup, and where the strings are held here. So the idea with this is that this is your fret. It's a very heavy piece of surgical grade steel, which is very, very finely polished to get a completely flat surface. And the idea is that you rest it on the strings and pluck the strings. And then you have a continuous pitch range that you can use. So you can do vibrato on this, on the entire chord. Like that. Now, the way the pedals work, if you look at the camera in the top of your screen, you can see the 3 pedals here. My swell pedal is here on my right foot, which is volume. Now, I've also got a knee lever here, which when I move my knee to the left changes the strings, some of the strings as well. And that's the idea of these pedals, is that some of the strings are altered in order to get other chords, and also the major scale on 1 bar position. So if I start off with a G chord, if I want A minor, notice the bar position hasn't changed, but I've pressed down pedals 2 and 3. So that's my chord 2. Chord 3, which is B minor in the key of G major, you just put your knee lever to the left, notice it's not always the root at the bottom. So you have to change the combinations of strings that you pluck in order to fully realise what the bottom note is. But if you've got a bass player, it doesn't matter. Chord 4 is C major, so that's these 2 pedals down, pedals 1 and 2. So you can hear 1 to 4, back to 1. The next chord is the dominant 7th, which is the middle pedal and the knee lever together. And there it is, resolving to G major. And then the last chord, E minor, which is chord 6, and that's just this pedal down here. So there's G and E minor. Now, G and E minor, they are only different with 1 note. G has got a G, a B and a D. E minor, you change the D in that G major chord to an E, and that's your minor. That's your E minor, rather. this does mean that you can kind of change, when you're playing along with stuff, you can sort of interchange G and E minor. So there's another E minor here, G here. So there's lots going on here. So that means that you can really just move up and down the neck to get those different inversions. Now you can also use the pedals 2 and 3 to create a sort of a diatonic movement of those chords. So G, A minor, B minor, C, D, and E minor. So you can use a combination of those things to generate your chord sequence. There's an awful lot of music theory flying about, or, you know, knowing your diatonic chords and things like relative majors and minors. That's a really good idea. So G is this. Now, if I want G minor, on guitar it's easy. You take a finger off your bar chord and you end up with your minor chord. Pedal steel guitar, it's not so easy. You have to find the relative major. That's B flat. So G, so your first step. So G, G minor. Notice there are other extensions that you can use. That G major, having the supertonic, that second note, that A, can really colour that up. And on guitar, it's harder to put close harmony stuff like that in. So that's a whole exploration on G that you can't really do on guitar. Not only that, you can change the pitch and do vibrato. Now I'm playing with no finger attachments on my right hand where you'd have pieces of metal to make it brighter, but I quite like that mid-range, quite dull sound. I'll use this as an effect. It's a bit like having a Hammond organ in your mix. Having a pedal steel there as well just really fills out space which might be or might not be required. So what I'm going to do next is I'm going to set up a loop here and just play with this in G and then G minor as well, so that you can see how those two things interact. So now what I'm going to do is to put this loop together. I'm going to use GarageBand drums here. I'm just going to have a 4-bar loop that we can then play over. Now we can try sticking some guitar over that, some pedal steel guitar, and just see what happens. So at the moment it's quite spiky, so maybe some held chords. Now that sort of thing. Now if I was to undo that last part, just leaving behind the bass there, what I'm going to do is I'm going to put G minor now, so that we've got a different sort of tonality. So see what happens with the steel there. So, remembering that we are now G minor, which means you would go to 6th fret and play essentially B flat major, which is your relative minor of G. Now that E flat didn't really work well because it's like the flattened 6th, whereas the natural 6th would work well, so you can have something like this. Have an F major chord in G minor. So you have to be very careful with your tuning to make sure that what you play, if it's going to be something over that chord that has extensions, like in that F major, where you start getting your 7ths and your 9ths and your 11ths, you've got to be very careful that it really is contributing to that chord and not getting in the way of it. However, if you're in G minor, if you stay on that G minor, you could play a sort of chorusy sort of effect, which would work nicely. And those little chord variations that you can hear would actually make a really massive difference to your overall sound. And of course I've got something sustained and that can do vibrato. Now you have one problem with the pedal steel. If you're playing that relative minor, that's your 2nd string, or the 9th technically, the one that's second closest to you, is basically not in G minor. So if you've got your bar and move it about enough, you'll start hearing that note in it. So one thing you can do is actually move the bar across so it's not touching the 9th or 10th strings, and you've got your fingers underneath so that you can really concentrate on those sounds. Because maybe you wouldn't want all that bass end floating about your mix because it would then get in the way. So if you had that A flat, would get in the way. So you can get get your minor ninth at the top. And your fourth. And in fact, the minor makes this much more flexible. You can do this. So you haven't got that seventh in the way. That string is there. You can play dominant sevenths. Not only with G, you had the dominant seventh, but you could also do your D7 like this, using that ninth string, which is your seventh. So that's the reason that string is there, apart from obviously playing a diatonic scale. So there we go. There is a little bit about how you can use a pedal steel, and if you're an amateur player, if you're a novice like I am, you can still use it to be really effective with making just different sounds. So if you see one in the free ads, like I saw this one in, buy it.